that I mentioned that our affinity to sugar is pretty recent, Madam Speaker. But sugar has been in use, granulated sugar has been in use for a very long time. In fact, as long as far back as the 6th century BC, the Indians were already using granulated sugar. But this refined sugar, Madam Speaker, is pretty recent because the refined sugar came with the effort on colonialization. And I want to associate it to colonialization so that I make the point that the sugar history has been replete with incidences on record, incidences that are sweet and bitter at the same time. Madam Speaker, the history of sugar is replete with a history of exploitation, Madam Speaker, a history of racialism, a history of obesity, Madam Speaker, a history of annexing land that has been used for settlement, Madam Speaker, a history of environmental degradation. And here in Kenya, Madam Speaker, it has been a painful history of exploitation of the farmer, Madam Speaker. So any effort, Madam Speaker, that seeks to remedy the plight of the farmer should be welcome, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I speak at a time when this House has already debated a sugar bill in its own motion and passed it, Madam Speaker. Over and above that, Madam Speaker, this House, in its own motion, has done what it needs to do to ensure that if it is the debts that are plaguing the factories that are the problem, that this House has done its bit, Madam Speaker. That, Madam Speaker, as recent as Monday this week, the President will received the instruments from this Parliament that were handed over after signing by the Speaker. Madam Speaker, these instruments were presented to the President, and these are the instruments that set in motion the setting aside of close to 200 billion Kenya shillings in debt that shall be written off. So, Madam Speaker, even as we debate this motion, I'm urging the Honorable Peter SALASYA to go and tell his people that collegiately this House has done what it needs to do. That this House is in support of his thinking, Madam Speaker. That this House unanimously across the different aisles, Madam Speaker, is in agreement with what he is asking for his people. So, Madam Speaker, I wanted to put it on record that this House is not sitting on its laurels looking at farmers wallowing in poverty while it is doing nothing. This House is doing what it needs to do at a time such as this. Madam Speaker, in the sugar bill that we passed, there was one critical issue that needs to be reported to the sugar belt. It was the issue on how they shall ring fence the land they use for farming sugar. After ring fencing the land, Madam Speaker, they ought to adopt modern practices in farming, Madam Speaker, so that we can have a crop that matures early enough, harvested early enough, and it's processed fast enough for the farmers to make money in good time. Finally, Madam Speaker, I'd like to talk about the issue of historical governance impropriety in the sugar belt, Madam Speaker. The sugar mills are being run down by individuals who have very little concern for the farmer and for the people of the area. Madam Speaker, it has to be repeated loudly from the hilltops, Madam Speaker, from the tops of the minarets and the mosques and the places everywhere in this country, Madam Speaker, that mambo ni matatu to anybody who becomes a hindrance to the benefit of farmers in this country, Madam Speaker. To them, mambo ni matatu. Madam Speaker, we've started on the sugar route. We need to do the same for cash crops like coffee in other regions, for cash crops like cotton in other regions, so that even as the sugar farmer is benefiting.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Anything out of order? What is out of order?
Madam Speaker, because this issue is so dear to us about sugar, can we lower the minutes to 3 so that each, even if you give 1 point, because we know well, you can explain something in 1 minute and you get the point. Please. Mambo ni matatu.
Honorable